Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So, a lot of you guys have been asking for a really long time, and the time's finally here. Let's do a walk around of war paint. Let's check out all the stuff that makes this Jeep tick. To start this video off, I'm just gonna talk about the transformation for a minute here, because war paint, to truly understand it, war paint did not come to me like this, okay? In its current state. It actually went through a couple of different build versions. When I first got war paint, which is a 2015 JKU Sport, it had a stock Dana 30 under the front end. It was regeared to a 456. It had 35s on it at the time, no lockers. And that's pretty much it, right? Had a hard top on it. And there was really nothing else done. But clearly that wasn't gonna work for me. So I wound up getting my hands on a Dana 44 front axle. Swapped that out, so it had the Dana 44s. I put a locker in the front for a little while, eventually had it re-geared to a 513 with another locker in the rear, put 38s on it. Still was on, decent flexi control arms. I'm not going to get too much into that build and take up more of your time, but pretty flexi, pretty fun Jeep on 38-inch tires with Dana 44s. But it was time to step it up again, right? I wanted to go to 40s. I wanted to make the Jeep even more flexy. I wanted the Jeep to more match my driving capability. So I built it the way it sits. So up at the front of the vehicle, the first thing that jumps out, and I gotta say, I get a ton of messages about this, is the bumper, okay? People are always asking me where the bumper came from, who makes it, and to be honest with you, I don't know. I assume it's some Chinese company somewhere, maybe on Amazon. I have no idea. I've never seen another one like it. But when I first got it, it didn't look like this. It was actually a full width bumper. It had these X's in the side, but they were kind of facing the front. I wound up actually shortening the bumper, making it a stubby, incorporating the X's back into it. I just used the steel that was already there that I was cutting off to kind of finish it. It had this hoop on the front, but it didn't have the grill hoop, and it didn't have this tubing here attaching the grill hoop to the winch hoop. Now, for those of you that are unaware, just a quick little bit of information here. Grill hoops are actually not there for looks in most cases. They're actually there so that in the event of a rollover, your Jeep's radiator does not get crushed, okay? And that's why I have that on my rig. I'm never planning on rolling it over, but we all know off-road, it's possible. Of course, in the center of this bumper, you're gonna see my winch. Now, this is a 12,000 pound winch. It came with a steel cable originally. I replaced it with a synthetic line. And guys, that winch is actually a Badlands winch from Harbor Freight. There's lots of reviews on them out there, and they are a fantastic, durable winch. This is their older version. Their new one comes with a synthetic line, and it also comes with a wireless remote. This one I have to plug in, but it works just fine. And frankly, I have no plans on getting a new one until this one stops working. So the headlights on this rig are actually Mopar headlights, and it's confused some people because I don't know for a fact, but I've been told that these LED headlights from Mopar came standard if you had the LED option starting in 2017. So I've had people ask me what year this Jeep is, and when they hear it's a 2015, they're kind of surprised because of the headlights. But these are a Mopar Performance LED headlight. They work really well, and they're right on par with some of the other real popular names as far as LED headlights go. Now, on the hood, I have a Poison Spyder hood vent. There's a reason for that. It does a pretty good job. You can go see my Poison Spyder hood vent review video. There's plenty of videos showing how to install them, but no one really talks about the aftermath and what they noticed and what differences they really make. Of course, I have a high lift jack up there. I'll have to make a video about that eventually too, showing you guys all the capabilities of those. I feel like a lot of people put a high lift jack on their rig and don't really know how to use it. And they're super safe and they're super effective if you know exactly how to use them and some of the attachments that can be used with them. So I definitely have my high lift jack on the hood. Take a short pause here in the middle of this video because I just want to mention to you guys, if you like what we're doing here on this channel, go click that subscribe button, right? It's going to help the YouTube channel in a big, big, big way. The giveaways are just going to get bigger. Those are starting soon. And frankly, guys, that's what YouTube cares about, right? I watched YouTube for many, many years. I never subscribed to anybody because I didn't realize clicking that subscribe button is free. It doesn't cost you a dime. All you need is a Gmail account because Google owns YouTube just like the rest of the world. And you guys can subscribe and choose to get notifications or not. So again, guys, if you like what we're doing, please support the channel. All right, so to move down here and talk about the axle and suspension that is under this rig. So that axle is a little bit different than the one I talked about a little while ago, right? I had said it came with a Dana 30, then I upgraded it to a Dana 44. Well, this axle is a Dana 60, but it's not an aftermarket Dana 60. It's a factory junkyard axle out of a 2011 F250 or F350. There's no difference. I have the inside stuffed with Yukon parts and a Yukon locker. I have a tie rod on it that was made out of DOM tubing. I made it myself. It's got Heim joints on the end. Same thing with my drag link. The factory steering box is still a factory steering box. And then I have a hydraulic ram down there made by a company called Redneck Ram. Actually, Redneck Ram is the name of the ram. The name of the company is actually West Texas Off-Road. And they make a fantastic ram setup. I know a bunch of people that have ran them, including myself. I've never had an issue with it. Now, as far as sway bars, okay, there's a lot of aftermarket sway bars out there. I don't have one. I have the stock sway bar in here. It works just fine. I have manual disconnects on it. They're made by Terraflex, real easy. You just pull a pin and they actually give you a place to store them right up here so you're not zip tying it up and out of the way. Pretty cool. And the front of the Jeep is on 3.5-inch springs, okay? The 3.5-inch springs set this Jeep's ride height the exact same as it was on a Dana 44 with 4.5-inch springs. The difference on why I can get away with that with a 3.5-inch spring is because the truss and the axle tube are a lot larger on a Dana 60. So when you put the spring on top, it actually sits a little bit higher than it would on a Dana 44. So when people ask me what my lift height is, it's a 3.5-inch, but it's on an aftermarket, you know, it's on a junkyard axle. So it's not really a 3.5-inch, right? So it's kind of tough to say. But my shocks are just Bilstein 5100s in the front. I have a slightly different shock in the back. We'll talk about that later. And I have a 3-link long arm suspension. That was also made by Barnes. It was just basically a builder kit. Came with DOM tubing, came with enduro joints, Heim joints, and brackets that you had to weld together and install into the vehicle. I also, on this Jeep, because of the bigger tires and living in Texas, I'd like to allow my transmission to last as long as possible. And we all know the enemies of transmissions are heat. So I installed an aftermarket B&M transmission cooler made for the JK. It fits right behind the grill really nicely. And with that and the 40-inch tires and the gears and the axles and all the extra added weight this rig has, I've actually never seen my transmission run hotter than 167 degrees. So it does a really good job of keeping that transmission cool. Let's take a look inside the Jeep. There's not a whole lot of modifications in there, but let's check them out. All right, so as you can see inside the Jeep, I do have a roll cage. Now, there is a roll cage video that talks about this roll cage and why I chose to go with it. It's pretty surprising, actually. You're definitely going to want to go check that out. But I do have a Smitty built, believe it or not, bolt-in roll. The only other thing really on the interior of this Jeep that wasn't here factory is my stereo system, right? That's a Sony head unit. It's got Bluetooth, you know, and Apple CarPlay, obviously, and it works fantastic. It also puts more power out to all 4 of your speakers. The speakers in this rig, both the ones up here in the dash and the ones in the speaker bar up here, I disconnected the factory tweeters that were in there, and I installed a 2-way kicker speaker. Not going to win any competitions with it, but it certainly is a much better stereo system than what was in here factory. And in the rear, it has a Memphis 10-inch self-powered. My rock sliders, okay, these sliders are made by a company called VKS Fabrication out of California. They are super solid sliders. This is their pre-runner slider, which basically acts as a step, allowing my, you know, kids or anyone shorter to get into the vehicle a little bit easier, but obviously welded out of really thick tubing. They have this plate on the bottom that unbolts, so you could either swap it out over time if it got damaged or paint it whatever color you wanted to. And then obviously it is welded to the frame of the vehicle at 3 points. Now, I did in the back have to move the 3rd point further forward because of where my 3-link long arm in the rear connects, but we'll get to that in a minute. But these are made by VKS Fab, and they are really awesome, and as you can see, I have abused them. One of the other things that's under the Jeep, you may have seen it in a couple of these last clips as I was talking about other things, are skid plates. I have Smitty-built skid plates, okay? Now, I am not generally a fan of Smitty-built stuff. I would never use their bumpers or anything like that. But there are a couple of things that they do, and they do it really well. So once again, you can check out that Smitty-built roll cage video, and you can also check out that Smitty-built skid plate video where I compare them to some of the more high-end options and why I chose to go the route that I did. All right, real quickly here on the back bumper, there's that same X that we saw on the front bumper, because again, this bumper was originally on the Jeep when I bought it. I assume whoever the prior owner was, they were the original owner. They must have bought these bumpers somewhere. But as I said before, I don't know where they came from. Now, I did make a couple of changes to this bumper, so we're gonna talk about those real quick. I cut and added some flush mount LED lights because we all know that the factory Jeep reverse lights are pretty awful. I have these wired to a switch. I can turn them on when I want to. I don't have to necessarily be in reverse. So they work really well off-road at campsites, things like that, when we need a little bit of light behind the vehicle. The other thing is this bumper originally had a tire carrier mounted on it, okay? And it's made pretty well, but I wound up cutting off the tire carrier that was on it because when I went to the 40-inch tire, right, it also had it over here. When I went to a 40-inch tire, I wanted a better departure angle and I didn't want all the weight hanging on the back of the rig, so I wound up putting the tire inside the Jeep. You can see how I do that in this YouTube video, but that's my back bumper. I don't have any complaints. I've hit it on some rocks and stuff. I've actually hit it so hard once that I shot it up and it bent my rear tailgate pretty badly and flaked a lot of the paint off. So I had to kind of get creative with some paint down there so that it didn't rust. But you know, all part of trailing your rig. Wait a second, that's not a Dana 44. And guys, it isn't, right? I did talk earlier about how the Jeep originally had a Dana 44, like all JKs do, whether you own a Rubicon or not. But I decided to go with 1-ton axles. So again, the front, I already told you about that one. The rear happens to be out of a 2002 Chevy Silverado 2500 pickup truck. And it is a 14-bolt rear end. Now that's a super popular rear end. They're really fun and easy to re-gear. I have it stuffed with Yukon parts, just like the front end. Obviously the gears match. I have Adams drive shafts in there for both my front and rear. And this axle works really well for me. Now, I also mentioned up front that I had a different shock in the rear. In the front, I have the Bilstein 5100, which is basically just a simpler version of this shock. In the rear, I have the Bilstein 5160. Now, the reason for that is because my front shocks were pretty new, all right? But my rear shocks were on the Jeep when I bought it, so I had to swap them out. When I swapped them out, I got the upgraded version of the Bilstein 5100. Now, The only reason it's upgraded is because you saw a second ago, it has this reservoir here, okay? Now, the only reason, all right, because a lot of people run these types of shocks and there's really no benefit to running it if you're just driving to the mall. But the only reason that you would want to run a shock like this is because it acts just like a normal Bilstein 5100, which is a great shock. But this extra reservoir here has extra oil in it, and it keeps your shock cooler. And heat, like so many things, it's also the enemy of shocks, okay? It wears the seals out and things like that. And as your shock moves up and down, it heats up that oil that's in there. So having more oil just simply allows the shock to run a little bit cooler and to last a little bit longer. Now, my rear springs are the same 3.5-inch springs that I have in the front. And they're just JKU 3.5-inch rock crawler springs. And my rear axle here, like I said before, it was a 14 bolt. But if you were a really fast counter and you counted those bolts around, there's only 13 of them. That's because I have the 13 bolt shave cover, which cuts 1.25 inches off the bottom of the diff, which is why the bottom of the diff is so flat. Gives me a little bit better ground clearance and gives you a really strong diff cover at the same time. You may have noticed I left my heat shield up there above the muffler because why not, right? But there's no muffler, and there isn't, and that's because I have a high clearance exhaust system. Now, there's many companies that make them. To be honest with you, I don't remember who made this. I know Flowmaster makes one. Something tells me it's not a Flowmaster, but I can't remember exactly. And it doesn't really matter. It's basically a cat back system. It tucks your muffler up right next to your driver's side frame rail and up and out of the way, basically between the frame rail and the drive shaft. And I wound up changing the muffler out anyway. This one came with kind of like a glass pack and it was just too loud. So I swapped it out and I wound up changing it to a Flowmaster Hush Power muffler, which quieted it down a little bit. To be honest with you, it doesn't sound all that great. But I didn't do it for the sound, I did it for the ground clearance. I smashed this muffler so bad a number of times off-road, I didn't want to keep replacing it. There's really no way to get these 3.6 engines to sound good. It was just for me all about ground clearance, and as you can tell, I've already even hit this on some stuff, but that's the way it goes. The only thing that's really left to discuss and talk about here is my wheels and tires. I do run a Raceline Monster beadlock, okay? You can tell it's an 8-lug, that's because of the axles that I run. And I have those wrapped in a Yokohama Geolander XMT. Now, that Yokohama tire, I really, really like it. I've ran a bunch of different tires over the years. I've ran everything from Milestars, just like everybody else, to Coopers, to Yokohamas. I've just run so many of them. And they're all pretty good. They all have their pros and cons. I would say the biggest con with this tire, and I'll talk more about it when I eventually do a tire review, but I've had these tires now for over a year, and I've taken them on some different terrains. I've taken them on the street. I've taken them on the street when it was wet. They've even been out in a little bit of snow, and they do great in everything. But they will tear and chunk if you're not running super low air pressure. So if you are gonna take these and bring them off-road, I would definitely recommend running a beadlock. So there you have it. That's war paint, okay? Obviously you're gonna see lots of other builds happen in this garage and come together. They're gonna come together a lot differently. It won't always just be Jeeps, but you've seen what war paint's capable of off-road. I built it here in my garage with my own 2 hands. It works pretty good. All right. Anyway, thanks for the support. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video.